Hello, and welcome to week 3 of Usability Principles and Practice. I am Dr. Chris Parker, and today we are talking about biometrics, so the quantitative data of ourselves. So, what we will do today, our intended learning outcomes are to recognize the role performance metrics play in identifying usability issues to influence the design of websites. Now, we're going to look at two things today. So, firstly, what are biometrics? Then we're going to look at eye tracking. So how does eye tracking play a part of the design evaluation process? So firstly, what are biometrics? Well, 55% of all communication your body does is non-verbal. 38% of that is tone of voice, and about 7% is actually what you're saying. Now, you can say things like, I love you, and that can be something like, I love you, or I love you. The words are the same, but the action is very different. So we infer a lot about things from non-verbal communication. As humans, we tend to be very bad at doing that. We pick up on the wrong cues constantly, but it's still a very big part of what it is. So when we're looking at the human body, we can infer a lot about how we're responding to the things around us, the stimuli. In this case, stimuli are websites. So what are biometrics? So we will go more into this in week 9 with psychology as to why we're interacting with things the way we are. But a lot of things about body movements, heart rate, nervous tics, these are things which we have no control over. So by observing them and in some cases measuring them, we can be very good at inferring, hey, something's going on here. Now, the warning here. Biometrics really can lie. So think about when you're buying something cheap online, so you're buying a book or, something strange off Wish, and, you're not worried about it. If something goes wrong, doesn't arrive, you're okay. But you're going to buy a flight somewhere, so you're spending hundreds of pounds. Suddenly, that nervousness is very important, so you become worried about things. Is your info correct? Have you entered things in the right way? So, the greater the personal stakes, the more our body reacts. It might be that the usability of the website is fine, and maybe you're just a bit scared. Maybe the situation calls you to feel in a certain way, so it's very bad if you take biometrics to be absolute truth. It's a very good indication, though, so you should definitely pay attention to it. So the emotions and tension we play, they form the two main categories of biometrics. So our facial expression, what's our face pulling? Is it a frown? Is it laugh? Is it smile? What is it? Now, skin conductance, are we sweating? Are we getting nervous and our palms getting clammy? EEG, which is our brain waves. So are we thinking a lot? Is it causing lots of things happening in our mind? And with that, is our pulse racing? Is our pulse going all the way? And the attention we're paying to the world around us is eye tracking. So let's have a look at these 5 biometrics in more detail. So our facial expressions are affective. So 6 basic emotions: happiness, surprise, sadness, fear, and disgust. Oh, and anger. Now, there's a classic textbook of what our faces show to show our emotional side. Lots of software and work has been done on automatically working out someone's internal state from the external facial expressions. Now, this makes complete sense. The author Malcolm Gladwell writes about this in his book, Talking to Strangers, that the TV series Friends is perfect. The reason why it's perfect is that when Ross shows anger, he sees anger in his face in the textbook examples. When Joey is confused, he has confusion on his face in the textbook examples. So all of the actors are acting perfectly for showing what they should be showing. However, that's not how real life is. Quite often we'll have an emotional state that doesn't match what our mind is showing. When I'm teaching a lecture in class, lots of times students will look at me with a glazed over look. It may not be that they are bored, it may not be that they are tired, it may not be they're not paying attention. Instead, it might just be that they're really concentrating hard, but I'm misinterpreting that. And we do this all the time. Malcolm Gladwell goes on to say how, as humans, we are very, very bad at determining the actual state of somebody's internal state. So we should always take this with a big grain of salt. Skin conductance is a bit different. So when we have a form of arousal, we're going to have activity in our skin. So we're going to have a degrees of sweat. Now this can be increased cognitive load. We're thinking a lot. We're doing physical activity. We are angry, joy, we're scared. A whole load of emotions. So there are devices which claim that they can detect our internal state from our conductance, in that our emotions have fingerprints in how our skin changes. But again, it's really more indication.
It's called a Q sensor. I tried out this wireless sensor, which measures electricity conducted through the skin.
But you see, that's what's happening there is the Q sensor being worn was claiming that they could tell when people with autism are having very stressful situations. However, the technology has not been widely rolled out. It's good, though. You can use it to infer something, but it's very difficult. EEG is much better in that it measures what's going on in someone's mind with this really wonderful little jellyfish cap. So each probe is put in a different part of the head. Each line of the chart is giving activity there. So the researchers can detect how much activity is going on in that probe, therefore that part of the brain, therefore that part of the brain does this kind of processing, therefore we can tell what you're doing. That's not utterly great. I mean, we might be able to say, well, this part of the brain's working, but does that mean that you are really thinking it? A really important thing to remember is that not all brains are the same. So when you look at a brain of someone who's dyslexic and give them some text to read, they will have different parts of their brain working to somebody who's not dyslexic. Now, does that mean that the person who's dyslexic is having a different reading experience to the non-dyslexic? Maybe, but they're both reading. They're both going through a comparable experience, but the EEG wouldn't take account of that on its own. So you've got to be quite wary of this. So so far everything's saying, it's be careful. So the last one here in the sort of basic reactions, stress. So pulse. When we are aroused, our pulse increases. So we can do physical activity, we can feel stress, we can feel excitement, and our pulse will quicken. But if you just take someone's pulse rate and show them a situation, maybe buying a plane ticket online, maybe doing something different like checking your bank statement, they might have a spike in their pulse. That doesn't mean that it's a website causing it. Maybe they just stood up. Maybe they saw something. Maybe they thought of something that is a bit naughty and not meant to tell anyone about. Who knows? So just having a pulse alone doesn't tell you that much. You'd always have to video participants and say, what are they doing at that moment? But the short answer is that all of these methods on their own are not overly good. You really have to do them together. You've got to do them with other methods, and you've got to take them in whatever context you can. The context has to be something like a video camera, and it's going to be a qualitative analysis. Now, moving on to the next one, which is a bit more useful. I mean, these methods about pulses, EEG, skin conductive, and effective facial expressions, not many UX designers actually use these. We are aware of them, we have it in our catalogue, but they're not overly useful. The next one, however, is very well used, which is eye tracking. So eye tracking is a very popular way at measuring where people look. Now, if you don't know where people are looking, you can't always see what needs to be changed. So if a page has low usability, somebody might be searching for a button. They can say, well, I'm trying to find this button that will do this thing. Or maybe they are trying to do a task where something's distracting them, pulling their eyes away, and that needs to be designed out. And they also got to say, well, are people looking at important or unimportant things? So we're looking at this picture here, which is an advert for shampoo. You'll see that men and women are looking at different things. So the men might look at the woman and then read the text and kind of lose interest very quickly. The women are going to focus on the woman, interestingly her eye, and look at the text again, but then look at the product. Another thing to think about is the top advert has the woman looking forward, the other woman at the bottom is looking towards the shampoo. Now this is part of the design skills. We're going to look at this in a few weeks' time. It does influence things, but remember that there's a lot of things there. So is the advert effective? Well, the top one, not really for men, bottom one for women, yes it is. Now, this has the mind-eye hypothesis from 1976. So when looking at a visual display and completing a task, the location of one gaze point corresponds to the thought that is on the top stack of the mental operations, which means that we're not in control of where we look. Where we look is always darting around, and it's the product of what's on our mind. Therefore, the theory goes that our gaze is a window into our internal soul. I'm not completely convinced of this, because when you look at something, maybe you're distracted by it rather than it's something that you really want to see. So you've really got to put it in a lot of context. Now, how do we interpret this? So in this picture, there's a lot of gaze on the bum, on the heel, and on the product name. There's some gaze on product information, which is the bottom left, and there's not very much on the brand logo. So what does this mean? The brand logo being bottom right. So this means that if we're trying to promote the brand, we're doing a very bad job. If we're trying to attract people who like women's bums, then this is actually a very good piece. We've got a good product name going across, but we're not getting... if the bottom information, the bottom left, is what's important, then it's not working. So you might want to say, well, let's make the brand logo bigger. Let's make the product information on the bottom left bigger. The rest of it seemed to be okay. The shoe she's wearing is getting lots of attention on the gaze, which is good. So you can view this in different ways. Now, importantly, on its own, this does not mean very much, because we don't know what task goals are. What's the metric that the company Reebok will deem as important? Without knowing what the task goal is, what the metrics are, it's very hard to say if it's successful. I would say this is semi-successful and needs more redesign, but who knows? Now, what this does is it helps you understand where the user's getting lost, maybe. But they're not really getting lost, everything's there. Well, the dog's distracting a little bit. So yeah, we know what we need modified. Now, eye tracking has a problem. Once again, the black writing is very important, and the red there means nothing, but I know where your eyes go. So we are easily distracted, we are easily fooled. Now that's a very useful thing to learn, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what is important to the user. As I said before, the theory says that you gaze where your mind's most active, but that doesn't take into account things you care about. So, what do you need to think about whilst doing eye tracking? Well, for experience design, marketing, and consumer testing, you use eye tracking to understand how people interact with products, both physical and digital. So you've got websites, mobile apps, and products on supermarket shelves. We can have eye tracks we wear around in our heads and see the world. Academically, we try and infer how people make decisions, and we try to study human cognition and perception. If you're doing multimodal interaction, then you're trying to control computers and hands so that when you look at this part of the board, the computer will do something. So you can use gaze as an input device. That's very similar to if you have assistive technology. So if you don't have use of your arms and legs, or you can't speak, you could use eye tracking as a very effective system. So there's two approaches to eye tracking. Generally there's screen mounted. It could be either mounted on a phone, normally mounted on a computer screen, and then there's glasses mounted. This reminds you of a very basic version of Google Glass, which is still around just about. Smart glasses haven't taken off, but as soon as they do, they will become the de facto for doing eye tracking tests, I'm sure. So this is a quick video of eye tracking using gaze point analysis. So I'm going to put only a few seconds of this.
Users free to move within the field of view of the camera. And you can see we're now linked in with our analysis software.
That's intentional for copyright purposes. You can see how somebody is looking at a few pages. They're talking about what they're doing whilst they're doing it. Talking about watching a video, but you can't see anything right now. You're just seeing the videos being played. In a second, what you're going to see is they will run some analysis on these videos.
Okay, so that was the recording of the study. Now we can analyze the data. We'll just take a quick look and make sure everything looks reasonable. Scroll through the video.
So you can see there where the guy's eyes
this little window gives you feedback on what the user was up to.
And as a result, you can see that gaze points in various bits.
And right now we're showing a fixation.
You see heat map, so you can see where he was looking at the most and what's the most important areas. So when you're visualizing data, there is two levels of detail you can think about. There's the individual level, so there's the eye movement you've got, so how much time there. You've got aggregated eye movement, so total. You have the amount of fixation, so how long you stared at one area. And then you've got a heat map, which is that wonderful rainbow colour, where the dark colours show lots of attention and the light colours show little attention. So fixation is a sequence of fixations that a participant makes on a website. You're trying to capture where the eye pauses for a tenth of a second. And the numbers represent the amount of time spent looking at that bit. So this is quite useful if you want to measure something about, where are people looking and for how long? Are they looking at our brand name? Are they given a task of navigation and spending a long time looking somewhere else? So there's a quick video of Google. So you see a fixation growing around. Heat maps are a bit different, but quite a similar bit of data in some senses. So you've got red areas representing a great density of fixation. And the blue areas represent low fixation. So you've got, it shows you which areas of the page attract the most visual attention. Here we go. So there we go, somebody's seeing a heat map.
So what we're going to do is show all the gaze data. So we're going to show the...
So I'm going to do this very quickly. The most common form of visual analysis is always measuring attention for specific areas. This is an area of interest. You determine it after data's been collected. So you go, hey, I want to know about the navigation, I want to know about the screen, I want to know about all these wonderful things. So you might go, well, how much attention was given to brand logo in design A and design B?
Now let's do some areas of interest. So in an image, we can create an area of interest just by highlighting the region we want to select. And we can change the transparency.
Okay, so there we are. Now, other metrics you can use are dwell time, so the total time spent looking at an area of interest to show its levels of interest. The number of fixations, so how long somebody looked at a certain area, how long that fixation was, the sequence, so it looked at the title, looked at the menu, looked at all these things in this order. How long it took them to look at the area you were interested. So this is commonly misunderstood, so people go, well, hey, what does time to first fixation mean? Well, it depends what area you're looking at. If you haven't specified an area to look at, then it doesn't really mean very much. So always specify your area of interest and then look how long it's going to take you to fixate on that moment. Then got how many times somebody revisits something. So you go, the brand logo is the most important thing. So we're looking at going, hey, do people notice it? Do they fixate on it? Do they look away? And do they return to it so that they can notice it again and really embed in their mind? That's quite a useful metric for advertising. And the hit ratio would be percentage of participants who had at least one fixation within the area of interest. Now, importantly, all these numerical bits here all relate to areas of interest. You've drawn a box around a certain object. It could be a search field, it could be a menu, it could be a title, it could be a picture. Whatever it is you are interested in, without specifying an area of interest, it is meaningless. Quite commonly, when you're doing eye tracking, you're not doing areas of interest. Most of the time, you're doing basic exploration. You're trying to find out what people just do. Where do they look? what's distracting them? We're not trying to improve the performance like an engineer. We're just trying to see what happens. In which case you wouldn't use any of these metrics. So if in doubt, in your first eye tracking, just go with heat maps. Go with the basic heat map. Look at what they're doing. Try and qualitatively understand it. Maybe later on when you're coming back, think, hey, this part's important. Let's make that an area of interest. Let's bring the metrics in. So how do you help eye tracking sessions run well? You must design tasks that require encoding and processing of visual information to achieve a well-specified goal. So, as we've got written here, tasks in which observers are only required to look at a page or scene don't provide these necessary task goals. Rather, tasks directly with instructions to search for and possibly read and process a particular item within a specified time limit should be specified. Short of it is, if you say, hey, here's the homepage of a website, go. People will look at it. People will analyze and they'll look around. Now, if you say to them, here's the prototype website, I want you to find a holiday to Mallorca, I want you to book it, here's £100, go. Now they've got purpose. Now they're doing things with a reason. And then where they look, how long they gaze and where they feel, that will change. And the data will become real. So specify a task, specify a goal, and why not let them go. Now, on top of this, extra peripheral information must be controlled. Now, what does this mean? Mask off other areas of the screen, remove distracting things all around. If you've got a TV in the background, if you've got a corridor, people walking by, if you've got lights flashing, if you've got anything that could distract somebody's gaze, if their eyes could flick away because they've been distracted, then you need to remove that distraction as much as possible. Otherwise, you'll be getting errors in your data. And then, scanning uncertainty should be minimized within tasks. What this means? Observers should have a general notion of location of visual targets and should not be surprised by the location of the target items. That means that websites should not be like, wow, 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 look at this, surprise. You're looking at having things normal. You're not trying to go for radical things. You're trying to go, well, this is something that you're familiar with and you know how to deal with it. So let's deal with it. Now, measuring the emotion is a very important part, but it's also a very difficult part. So, our emotions are mostly hidden from view. If you want to find out how someone is feeling, interviews are the best one to do to get hold of that. Sitting down and talking to somebody and go, hey, how you doing? What did you first feel when you saw this? What does it remind you of? Getting together, building rapport, getting to know each other a little bit in that sort of brief interview environment. So they trust you and they start to tell you more about what's going on in their mind. Just looking at eye track data won't tell you much or anything about emotions. Now, why is that important? Because in user experience, we care about solving emotional problems. Usability on itself is not going to solve all the emotional problems someone has. It'll help. It'll get in the process, but it won't be this big old solution. So, coming to the end of the video, our tour through biometrics. We set out to recognize the role performance metrics play, identifying usability issues to influence redesign websites. In particular, those metrics are from eye tracking. Have we done that? Yes, we've had a look at all the different eye trackings. We've had a look at what biometrics are. We've had a look at pulses. We've had a look at skin conductivity. We've had a look at all these things. Then we went to eye tracking and had a brief overview into what it is and how to use it. By now, your view of what eye tracking is will have been reframed, so you can start to think about where eye tracking should be used. Now, the next stage is to go forward and get some eye tracking equipment and have a go with it. But until then, if you find this video useful, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps to support the channel, and you'll be notified of all the videos as soon as they come live. Also, we've got the podcast. We've now launched podcast, so it's available on Apple Podcast, Himalaya, and of course YouTube, because you'll have seen the video on here. So please follow the Usability podcast. You can find us on Twitter at usergendesign, which is Gen with a G-E-N. So check us on Twitter, give us a tweet, and look forward to seeing you again next week, where we're going to go into satisfaction metrics. So I'm Dr. Chris Parker. Thank you.